Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last best rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. I am Sniper Shadow, and I reside here in Sniper's Rest as a guide and a custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the worlds within the multiverse often, but I'm always here to guide and care for travelers, such as yourself, that pass through the here and there. Today we continue reading the series of short stories by H.P. Lovecraft. Today's story is entitled The Shadow over Innsmouth, and was written between November and December of 1931. It forms part of the Cthulhu mythos, and was the only one of Lovecraft's stories that was published in novel form during his lifetime. Let's see where today takes us. The Shadow over Innsmouth, Chapter 1. During the winter of 1927 and 1928, officials of the federal government made a strange and secret investigation of certain conditions in the ancient Massachusetts seaport of Innsmouth. The public first learned of it in February, when a vast series of raids and arrests occurred, followed by the deliberate burning and dynamiting, under suitable precautions, of an enormous number of crumbling, worm-eaten and supposedly empty houses along the abandoned waterfront. Uninquiring souls let this occurrence pass as one of the major clashes in a spasmodic war on liquor. Keener news followers, however, wondered at the prodigious number of arrests, the abnormally large force of men used in making them, and the secrecy surrounding the disposal of the prisoners. No trials or even definite charges were reported, nor any of the captors seen thereafter in the regular jails of the nation. There were vague statements about disease and concentration camps, and later about dispersal in various naval and military prisons, but nothing positive ever developed. Innsmouth itself was left almost depopulated, and is even now only beginning to shew signs of a sluggish revived existence. Complaints from many liberal organizations were met with long confidential discussions, and representatives were taken on trips to certain camps and prisons. As a result, these societies became surprisingly passive and reticent. Newspaper men were harder to manage, but seemed largely to cooperate with the government in the end. Only one paper, a tabloid always discounted because of its wild policy, mentioned the deep-diving submarine that discharged torpedoes downwards in the marine abyss just beyond Devil's Reef. That item, gathered by chance in a haunt of sailors, seemed indeed rather far-fetched, since the low black reef lies a full mile and a half from the Innsmouth harbour. People around the country and the nearby towns muttered a great deal among themselves, but said very little to the outer world. They had talked about dying and half-deserted Innsmouth for nearly a century, and nothing new could be wilder or more hideous than what they had whispered and hinted years before. Many things had taught them secretiveness, and there was now no need to exert pressure on them. Besides, they really knew very little, for wide salt marshes and desolate and unpeopled keep neighbours off from Innsmouth on landward side. But at last I am going to defy the ban on speech about this thing. Results, I am certain, are so thorough that no public harm save a shock of repulsion could ever occur from a hinting of what was found by those horrified raiders at Innsmouth. Besides, what was found might possibly have more than one explanation. I do not know just how much of the whole tale has been ever told to me, and I have many reasons for not wishing to probe deeper. For my contact with this affair has been closer than that of any other layman, and I have carried away impressions which are yet to drive me to drastic measures. It was I who fled frantically out of Innsmouth in the early morning hours of July 16, 1927, and whose frightened appeals for government inquiry and action brought the whole reported episode. I was willing enough to stay mute while the affair was fresh and uncertain, But now that it is an old story with public interest and curiosity gone, I have an odd craving to whisper about those few frightful hours in that ill-rumoured and evilly shadowed seaport of death and blasphemous abnormality. The mere telling helps me to restore confidence in my own faculties, to reassure myself that I was not simply the first to succumb to a contagious nightmare hallucination. It helps me, too, in making up my mind regarding a certain terrible step which lies ahead of me. I never heard of Innsmouth till the day before I saw it for the first time. And so far, last time. I was celebrating my coming of age by a tour of New England, sightseeing, antiquarian, and genealogical, and had planned to go directly from ancient Newburyport to Arkham, whence my mother's family was derived. I had no car, but was travelling by train, trolley, and motor coach, always seeking the cheapest possible route. In Newburyport, they told me that the steam train was the thing to take to Arkham, and it was only at the station ticket office, when I demurred the high fare, that I learned about Innsmouth. The stout, shrewd-faced agent, whose speech shewed him to be no local man, seemed sympathetic towards my efforts at economy, and made a suggestion that none other of my informants had offered. "You could take the old bus, I suppose," he said with a certain hesitation. "But it ain't thought much of hereabouts. It goes through Innsmouth. You may have heard about that. And so the people don't like it. Run by an Innsmouth fellow, Joe Sargent, but never gets any custom from here, or Arkham neither, I guess. Wonder if it keeps running at all. Suppose it's cheap enough, but I never see more'n 2 or 3 people in it. Nobody but those Innsmouth folks. Leaves the square in front of Hamilton's drugstore at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m., unless they've changed lately. Looks like a terrible rattletrap. I ain't never been on it." That was the first I ever heard of the shadowed Innsmouth. Any reference to a town not shewn on common maps or listed in recent guidebooks would have interested me, and the agent's odd manner of allusion roused something like real curiosity. A town able to inspire such dislike in its neighbours, I thought, must be at least rather unusual, and worthy of a tourist's attention. If it came before Arkham, I would stop off there. And so I asked the agent to tell me something about it. He was very deliberate, and spoke with an air of feeling slightly superior to what he said. "Innsmouth? Well, it's a queer kind of town. Down at the Mount of Manox. Used to be almost a city. Quite a port before the war in 1812. But all gone to pieces in the last 100 years or so. No railroad now. B&M never went through. And the branch line from Rowley was given up years ago. More empty houses than there are people, I guess. And no businesses to speak of, except fishing and lobstering. Everybody trades mostly here or in Arkham or Ipswich. Once they had quite a few mills, but nothing's left now except one gold refinery running on the leanest kind of part-time. That refinery, though, used to be a big thing. An old man Marsh, who owns it, must be richer than Croesus. Queer old duck, though, and sticks mighty close to his home. He's supposed to have developed some skin disease or deformity late in life that makes him keep out of sight. Grandson of Captain Obed Marsh, who founded the business. His mother seems to have been some kind of foreigner, they say a South Sea Islander, so everybody raised Cain when he married an Ipswich girl 50 years ago. They always do that about the Innsmouth people. And folks here and hereabouts always try to cover up any Innsmouth blood they have in 'em. But Marsh's children and grandchildren look just like anyone else, so as far as I can see. I've had 'em pointed out to me here through... Though come to think of it, the elder children don't seem to be around lately. Never saw the old man. And why is everybody so down on Innsmouth? Well, young fellow, you mustn't take too much stock in what people say round here. They're hard to get started, but once they do get started, they never let up. They've been telling things about Innsmouth, whispering 'em mostly for at least 100 years. I guess, and I gather, they're more scared than anything else. Some of the stories would make you laugh about old Captain Marsh driving bargains with the devil and bringing imps out of hell to live in Innsmouth, or about some kind of devil worship and awful sacrifices in some place near the wharves that people stumbled on in around 1845 or thereabouts. But I come from Panton, Vermont, and that kind of story don't go down with me. You ought to hear, though, what some of these old-timers tell about the Black Reef off the coast. Devil's Reef, they call it. It's well above water a good part of the time, and never much below it, but at that you could hardly call it an island. The story is there's a whole legion of devils sometimes on that reef, sprawled about or darting in and out of some kind of caves near the top. It's a rugged, uneven thing. It's a good bit of it, a bit over a mile out. And towards the end of the shipping days, the sailors used to make big detours just to avoid it. That is, sailors that didn't hail from Innsmouth. One of the things they had against old Captain Marsh was that he was supposed to land on it sometimes at night when the tide was right. Maybe he did, for I dare say the rock formation was interesting, and it's just barely possible he was looking for pirate loot and maybe finding it. But there was talk of his dealing with the demons there. Fact is, I guess, on the whole, it was really the captain that gave the bad reputation to the reef. That was before the big epidemic in 1846, when over half the folks in Innsmouth was carried off. They never did quite figure out what the trouble was, but it was probably some foreign kind of disease from somewhere by the shipping. Surely was bad enough. There was riots over it, and all sorts of ghastly doings that I don't believe ever got outside of town. And it left the place in awful shape. Never came back. Can't be more than 300 or 400 people living there now. But the real thing behind the way the folks feel is simply prejudice. I don't say I'm blaming those that hold it. I hate those Innsmouth folks myself, and I wouldn't care to go to their town. Suppose you know, though I can see you're a Westerner by your talk. And a lot of our New England ships used to have to do with ports in Africa, Asia, and the South Seas, and everywhere else. What kinds of people they sometimes brought back with them. You've probably heard about the Salem man who came home with a Chinese wife, and then maybe you know there's a bunch of Fiji Islanders somewhere on Cape Cod. Well, there must be something like that on the back of Innsmouth people. The place is badly cut off from the rest of the country by marshes and creeks, and we can't be sure the ins and outs of the matter, but it's pretty clear that old Captain Marsh must have brought home some odd people. And when he had all three of his ships in commission back in the 20s and 30s, there was a strange kind of streak in the Innsmouth folks today. I don't know how to explain it, but it sort of makes you crawl. You'll notice a little in Sergeant if you take his bus. Some of them had weird faces, and their skin, it ain't quite right. They get bald too, very, very young. The older fellows look the worst. Fact is, I don't ever think I've ever seen an old chap of that kind. I guess they must die in the looking glass. Animals hate 'em. They used to have lots of horse trouble before the autos came in. Nobody around here or in Arkham or Ipswich will have anything to do with them, and they act kind of offish themselves when they come into town, or when anyone tries to fish on their grounds. Queer how fish are always the thick of Innsmouth Harbour, when there ain't any anywhere else around. But just try to fish there yourself and see the folks chase you off. Those people used to come here on railroad, walking and taking the train at Rowley just after the branch was dropped, but now they use that bus. Yeah, there's a hotel in Innsmouth. It's called Gilman House. But I don't believe it can amount to much. I wouldn't advise you to try it. Better to stay over here and take the 10 o'clock bus tomorrow morning. Then you can get an evening bus for Arkham at 8 o'clock. There was a factory inspector who stopped in the Gilman a couple of years ago. He had a lot of unpleasant hints about the place. Seems they get a queer crowd there. For this fellow heard voices in other rooms, but though most of them were empty, give him the shivers. It was talk, he thought, but the bad thing about it was the kind of voice that sometimes spoke. Sounded so unnatural, sloping like, he said. And he didn't dare undress and go to sleep, just waited up and lit out the first light in the morning. The talk went on almost all night. This fellow, Casey his name was, had a lot to say about how the Innsmouth folk watched him and seemed kind of on guard. He found the Marsh refinery a queer place. It's an old mill on the lower falls of Magnox. What he said tallied up with what I'd heard. Books in bad shape, ain't no clear account of any kind of dealings. You know, it's always been kind of a mystery where the Marshes get the gold they refine. They never seem to do much buying in that line, but years ago they shipped out an enormous amount of ingots. Used to be talk of kind of jewellery that sailors and refinery men sometimes sold on the sly, or that was seen once or twice on some of the Marsh women folk. People allowed maybe old Captain Obed traded for in some heathen port, especially since he was always ordering stacks of glass beads and trinkets such as seafaring men used to get for native trade. Others thought, and still think, he found an old pirate cache out on the Devil's Reef. But here's the funny thing. The old captain's been dead these 60 years, and there ain't been a good-sized ship out that place since the Civil War. But just the same, the Marshes keep on buying those few native trade things. Mostly glass and rubber, they tell me. But maybe the Innsmouth folk came to look at them themselves. God knows they've gotten to be about as bad as the South Sea folks. That plague of 46 must have taken the best blood in the place. Anyway, they're doubtful lot now, and the Marshes and the other rich folks are as bad as any. As I told you, there probably ain't more than 400 people in the whole town, despite all of the streets they say they are. I guess they're what they call white trash down south, lawless and sly, full of secret doings. They get a lot of fish and lobsters and do exporting by truck. Odd how the fish swam right there and nowhere else. Nobody can ever keep track of these people. The state school officials and the census men have a devil of a time. You can bet the prying strangers ain't welcome around Innsmouth. I've heard personally more than one business or government man that's disappeared there. And there's loose talk of one who went crazy and is out in Danvers now. They must have fixed him up something awful scare for that fellow. That's why I wouldn't go at night if I was you. I've never been there and I have no wishes to go, but I guess a daytime trip couldn't hurt you, even though people hereabouts will advise you not to make it. If you're sightseeing and looking for old-time stuff, Innsmouth ought to be quite a place for you. And so I spent the part of that evening at Newsbury Public Library looking up data about Innsmouth. When I had tried to question the folks in the shops, the lunchroom, the garages, and the fire station, I had found them even harder to get started than the ticket agent had predicted, and realized that I could not spare the time to overcome their first instinctive resentedness. They had a kind of obscure suspiciousness, as if there was something amiss with anyone too much interested in Innsmouth. At the YMCA where I was stopping, the clerk merely discouraged my going to such a dismal and decadent place, and the people at the library shewed much the same attitude. Clearly, in the eyes of the educated, Innsmouth was merely an exaggerated case of civic degradation. The Essex County histories on the library shelves had very little to say, except the town was founded in 1643, noted for shipbuilding before the Revolution, a seat of great marine prosperity in the early 19th century, and later a minor factory centre using the Minox as power. The epidemic and riots of 1846 were very sparsely treated, as if they formed a discredit to the county. References to decline were few, though the significance of later record was unmistakable. After the Civil War, all industrial life was confined to the Marsh Refining Company, and the marketing of gold ingots formed the only remaining bit of major commerce aside from the eternal fishing. That fishing paid less and less as the price of the commodity fell and large-scale corporations offered competition. But there was never a dearth of fish around the Innsmouth harbour. Foreigners seldom settled there, and there was some discreetly veiled evidence that a number of Poles and Portuguese who had tried it had been scattered in a peculiarly drastic fashion. Most interesting of all was the glancing reference to the strange jewellery vaguely associated with Innsmouth. It had evidently impressed a whole countryside, more than a little, for mention of made specimens in the Museum of Miskatonic University at Arkham, and in the display room of the Newburyport Historical Society. The fragmentary descriptions of these things were bold and prosaic, but they hinted to me an undercurrent of persistent strangeness. Something about them seemed so odd and so provocative that I could not put them out of my mind, despite the relative lateness of the hour. I resolved to see the local sample, said to be large, queerly proportioned thing evidently meant for a tiara, if it could possibly be arranged. The librarian gave me a whole note of introduction to the curator of the society, Miss Anna Tilton, who lived nearby, and after a brief explanation that the ancient gentlewoman was kind enough to pilot me to the closest building. Since the hour was not outrageously late, the connection was a notable one indeed. But in my present mood I had eyes for nothing but the bizarre object which glistened in a corner cupboard under the electric lights. It took no excessive sensitiveness to beauty to make me literally gasp at the strange, unearthly splendour of the alien, opulent fantasy that rested there on a purple velvet cushion. Even now I can hardly describe what I saw, though it was clearly enough of a sort of tiara, as the description had said. It was tall in front, with a very large and curiously irregular periphery, as if it was designed for a head almost freakishly elliptical in outline. The materials seemed to be predominantly gold, though a weird lighter lustriousness hinted at some strange alloy with equally beautiful and scarcely identifiable metal. Its condition was almost perfect, and one could have spent hours in studying the striking and puzzlingly untraditional designs, some simply geometrical and some plainly marine, chased or moulded in the high relief on its surface with a craftsmanship of incredible skill and grace. The longer I looked, the more the thing fascinated me, and in this fascination there was a curiously disturbing element hardly to be classified or accounted for. At first I decided that it was a queer, otherworldly quality of the art that made me uneasy. All other art objects I have ever seen either belonged to some known racial or national stream, or else were consciously modernistic defiances of every recognized stream. This tiara was neither. It clearly belonged to some settled technique of infinite maturity and perfection, yet that technique was utterly remote from any Eastern or Western, ancient or modern, which I had ever seen or heard of. It was as if the workmanship was that of another planet. However, I soon saw that my uneasiness had a second and perhaps equally potent source residing in the pictorial and mathematical suggestions of the strange designs. The patterns all hinted of a remote secret and unimaginable abyss in space and time, and the monotonously aquatic nature of reliefs became almost sinister. Among these reliefs were fabulous monsters of abhorrent grotesqueness and malignity, half ichthyic and half Bacharian in suggestion, which could only dissociate from certain haunting and uncomfortable sense of pseudo-memory, as if they called up some image from deep cells and tissues whose retentive functions were wholly and primarily and awesomely ancestral. At times I fancied that every contour in these blasphemous fish frogs was overflowing with the ultimate quintessence of unknown and inhuman evil. In odd contrast to the tiara's aspect was its brief and prosy history related by Miss Tilton. It had been pawned for a ridiculous sum at a shop on State Street in 1873 by a drunken Innsmouth man shortly afterwards who was killed in a brawl. The Society had acquired it directly from the pawnbroker, at once giving it a display worthy of its quality. It was labelled probable East Indian or Indo-Chinese provenance, though the attribution was frankly tentative. Miss Tilton, comparing all possible hypotheses to its origin and presence in New England, was inclined to believe that it formed some part of exotic pirate horde discovered by old Captain Albert Marsh. This view was surely not weakened by the insistent offers of a purchase at a high price, which the Marshes began to make as soon as they knew of its presence, and which they repeated to this day despite the Society's unvarying determination not to sell. As the good lady shooed me out of the building, she made it clear that the pirate theory of marsh fortune was the popular among intelligent people of the region. Her own attitude towards Shadow's Innsmouth, which she had never seen, was one of disgust at the community slipping so far down the cultural scale. She assured me that the rumours of devil worship were partly justified by a peculiar secret cult that had gained force there and engulfed all Orthodox churches. She said it was called the Esoteric Order of the Dragon, and was undoubtedly debased, quasi-pagan thing imported from the East a century before, at a time when Innsmouth fisheries seemed to be going barren. Its persistentness among simple people was quite natural in the view of sudden and permanent return of abundantly fine fishing, and as soon became to be the greatest influence on the town, replacing Freemasonry altogether, and taking up headquarters in the old Masonic Hall on New Church Green. All this, to the piteous Miss Tilton, formed an excellent reason for shunning the ancient town of decay and desolation. But to me, it was merely a fresh incentive. To my architectural, historical anticipations now added an accurate anthropological zeal. I could scarcely sleep in my small room at the Y as the night wore away. That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week and we will continue The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. If you wish to rest some more, please find a space that suits you, whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden. Please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse has an ever-changing set of portals to explore, so good luck, my friend, wherever you end up. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going, thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.